The phone rang once and stopped, and the silence after it felt heavier than the war itself. December 1945, the fighting was done, and Europe was trying to breathe again. Yet, in a quiet office, the air froze. I stood a step behind the Supreme Commander as he held the receiver and said nothing. When he finally spoke, it was softer than I expected, and it told me everything had already changed. Tell me in the comments what you think a man like him would say in that moment. I was his aide, an American officer whose job was to listen and remember and forget at the right times. The office was plain maps, rolled and stacked a coat on a hook, a window showing winter light that never warmed anything. The call came from a military hospital not far away. The words were clinical and brief. An accident, 12 days. Complications. The name landed like a dropped tool. The man who had scared enemies and embarrassed friends was gone. The commander set the receiver down and did not move. He stared at the wall as if it might argue back. I waited because waiting had become my second language. Outside, a staff car passed and somewhere a clerk laughed, a normal sound that felt wrong. The war teaches you which noises belong and which ones do not. This one did not. Public duty arrived quickly, as it always does. Statements needed drafting condolences, prepared schedules adjusted. He nodded to all of it without reading. He asked me to close the door, and the click sounded too loud. Then he said a single word, gone. He repeated it as if testing weight. Gone. To understand what happened next, you need to know what he had been doing in the weeks before. The victory parades were over, and most generals were planning returns and promotions. Not the man whose name the hospital had spoken. He had been given a command that existed on paper, a task that asked him to write history instead of making it. For a man built for motion, it was a cage dressed as honor. I had seen them together in those months, two giants reduced to small talk and careful pauses. Their visits were polite and strained. One carried the burden of alliances and politics. The other carried impatience like a loaded weapon. They had needed each other to win and resented that need at the same time. That tension had powered half the war and poisoned the rest. When the commander finally spoke again, it was not to me. He spoke to the room as if the room had ears. He said, "We lost more than a general today." Then he stopped. I thought he would say a country or an army. He did not. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and asked me to sit. I had never seen him like that. During the worst days, when the lines bent and the radios screamed, he had been calm. He had made lists and choices and accepted blame with a steady face. Now the war was finished, and a different enemy had found him. Time. He asked me what people would say. I told him they would say the right things. He nodded and said, "That is what worries me." He asked me to stay late. He asked me to bring the notebooks. I kept the ones with dates and fragments, and private remarks never meant for daylight. I hesitated, and he noticed. He said, "I am not asking you to betray anyone. I am asking you to help me remember." We worked until the light changed. He spoke in short bursts, not speeches. He talked about speed and instinct and fear. He said there were moments when he would stare at a map and wait for someone else to see what the other man saw immediately. He said that made him angry and grateful in equal measure. He said he had spent months holding a leash and years wishing he could cut it. Then he went quiet again. At some point he laughed, and it startled me. It was a dry sound. He said, "You know what the truth is?" I leaned forward. He said, "I was jealous." I wrote it down because he asked me to. He said the other man never doubted himself, not for a second, and that kind of certainty moves men when plans cannot. He said certainty scares politicians and comforts soldiers. He said he needed both and only had one at a time. Outside the building, a guard changed shifts. The scrape of boots echoed. He watched the door and said, "If there is another war, we will need to frighten people without firing a shot." He said, "Presence matters." He said the other man had presence like a storm on a clear day. He said storms end, but the memory of them keeps fields empty. The next morning, the public statement went out. It was perfect. It praised service and valor and sacrifice. It said nothing that could not be printed. Cameras flashed. Hands were shaken. I stood behind him and watched his jaw tighten when the questions drifted toward legacy. He answered carefully and ended it early. Back in the office, he asked me to cancel an appointment. He asked me to walk with him instead. We walked through corridors that smelled of ink and coffee. People straightened when they saw him and then relaxed when he passed. He stopped by a map and traced a route with his finger. He said that drive nearly broke the enemy. He said he had argued against it and then relied on it. He said that his leadership and hypocrisy share a border. At lunch, he ate little. He told me a story from years before when they had argued late into the night. He said the other man had called him cautious and he had called the other reckless. He said both were true. He said together they had been right more often than alone. Then he stopped again and looked at me. He said, "Did I ever tell him that?" I did not answer because the answer was no. In the afternoon, a message arrived from a friend who had been present at the hospital. It described a room quiet, except for breathing. It described eyes that stayed sharp to the end. He read it twice and folded it carefully. He placed it in a drawer and closed it. He said, "Sometimes the worst thing about command is you think there will be time." As evening fell, he asked me to stay again. He asked me to write down what he said next exactly. He said, "When the call came, I realized we had lost the one man who could do the thing I could not." He said, "I can plan and balance and persuade." He said he could take broken units and make them dangerous before supper. He said that gift does not grow on trees. He said you do not replace it, you borrow it and hope it stays. He stood and went to the window. Lights came on across the city. He said the world is changing and the next fight will not announce itself. He said the other man would have understood that without being told. He said that scared him. Before leaving, he asked me a final thing. He asked me to keep these notes sealed unless he said otherwise. He said the country did not need this tonight. He said someday it might. I agreed and locked the folder. As I turned off the lamp, he stopped me. He said, "I want you to remember this moment." He said, "Remember how quiet it is." He said, "Remember what silence costs." Then he opened the door and the hallway swallowed us. If you think this was the moment the truth finally surfaced, say so in the comments. Like the video if you feel the weight of what was left unsaid. In the next chapter, I will tell you what he admitted to his inner circle and why those words would haunt him long after the flags were folded. The truth did not come out all at once. It leaked in controlled rooms where voices dropped and doors closed softly. The commander understood instinctively that grief shared too widely becomes theater. He chose instead a narrow circle, people who had watched him hold the alliance together with clenched teeth and careful words. I was there when he decided who would hear it first. He did not choose rank, he chose memory. The first conversation happened late after the building had thinned and the phones stopped hunting for him. He sat across from a senior planner whose job had been to translate instinct into orders. The man asked the obvious question, "What happens now?" The commander did not answer directly. He said, "Now we find out what we leaned on without admitting it." The planner frowned and waited. Silence again. Then the commander said, "I spent years restraining him and nights praying I could unleash him." The planner blinked. That sentence cut through the room. Word traveled carefully, not as gossip, but as weight. In another office, a logistics chief heard a version that sounded practical. He heard that speed had a face, and now it was gone. He heard that momentum would need rules instead of a man. He nodded as if taking inventory. Each retelling sharpened the edge without dulling the truth. The commander called a small meeting the next morning. No agenda, no notice. He spoke standing because sitting felt wrong. He said, "We are entering a period where we will be tested without warning." He said, "The enemy will not always wear a uniform." He said, "Deterrence will matter more than victory parades." He paused and looked at the floor. He said there was one person who understood that before the rest of us, and now he is gone. The room absorbed it. No one argued. I watched faces change. Some felt relief because chaos had frightened them. Some felt fear because certainty had protected them. The commander saw it too. He said, "Do not mistake this for nostalgia." He said, "Nostalgia is cheap." He said, "This is an accounting." He said, "When a system loses a component, you adjust the design or you accept failure." He said, "We will adjust." That afternoon, the press pressed harder. They wanted quotes that sparkled. They wanted conflict smoothed into legend. The commander gave them calm and nothing else. He spoke about service and ended early again. Behind the curtain, he rubbed his temples and asked me for coffee. He said, "The hardest part of command is knowing when not to say the most interesting thing you know." Later, he met with a diplomat who had always disliked the other man's bluntness. The diplomat expected satisfaction. He did not get it. The commander listened to the praise of balance and said, "Balance requires something to counterweight." He said, "Now we will find another way." The diplomat left unsettled. The commander noticed and said, "Discomfort is sometimes the correct response." The twist came quietly that evening. A report arrived from overseas about a border incident that fizzled without shots. The commander read it and tapped the paper. He said this is exactly the kind of moment that man would have turned into leverage by doing nothing except existing. He said presence can end arguments before they begin. He said we will need to learn that lesson without the teacher. As days passed, the inner circle grew more aware of what had been lost. Stories surfaced that reframed old frustrations, a unit that had been rescued by speed, a gamble that paid because it terrified the right people. The The commander listened and corrected details without softening conclusions. He said, "This is not sainthood." He said, "This is utility." He said, "Utility matters." One night, he asked me to bring the sealed notes back to the table. He read a line and shook his head. He said, "I always thought we would have time to talk like this." When the noise stopped, he said, "The noise stopped, and time did not slow down." He closed the folder and pushed it away. He said, "Regret is a poor advisor, but a good teacher." He said, "Learn fast." The calls kept coming. Senators, journalists, old friends. He answered less. He delegated more. He slept badly. When he did sleep, he woke with plans half-formed and wrote them down as if racing someone who could no longer run. I realized then that the competition had not ended with death. It had moved inward. At the end of the week, he gathered the same small circle again. He said, "We will honor him properly, and we will move on properly." He said, "We will not pretend this did not matter." He said, "Pretending is how systems fail quietly." He said, "If any of you think I am wrong, tell me now." No one spoke. He nodded and dismissed us. As we filed out, he stopped me and asked a question that felt like a test. He asked what I thought the country needed to hear. I said the country needs to hear strength. He smiled slightly and said, "Strength comes in different shapes." He said, "Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like honesty." He said, "Tonight, it looks like silence." If you think silence can be stronger than speeches, say so in the comments. Like the video if you feel the tension tightening. In the next chapter, I will tell you about the funeral preparations and the single remark that escaped him and changed how those around him saw everything. The funeral plans moved faster than grief and slower than rumor, a careful pace chosen to keep the edges from cutting anyone. The commander approved logistics with a steadiness that looked like routine, yet I could see the cost in the way he pressed his fingers together before speaking. He insisted on simplicity, no spectacle beyond what duty required. He said the man deserved to rest among soldiers and not beneath speeches. That choice surprised some and relieved others. It also drew attention from people who believed ceremonies exist to be watched. I accompanied him to the rehearsal of movement vehicles, lining up in cold order flags, folded and checked timings measured to the minute. He corrected a detail about spacing and then waved the officer on. He did not linger. When we stepped aside, he told me that rituals should be precise and brief, because precision honors the living and brevity honors the dead. I wrote that down, and later wondered if it was advice or confession. Messages arrived from friends and rivals alike. Some praised courage. Some softened old disputes. Some tried to claim proximity they had never earned. The commander sorted them with a glance. He kept the sincere and returned the rest with polite silence. Silence again, the same tool used to end arguments weeks before. I realized then that his silence was not emptiness. It was structure. The first twist came from a junior officer I barely knew. He approached me after a meeting and spoke carefully as if walking across ice. He said he had heard the commander say something unexpected. He said the commander had admitted envy. I asked, where? He said nowhere official. He said it slipped out between tasks like a dropped bolt. The rumor spread not because it was scandalous, but because it felt honest. Honesty travels faster than praise. I told the commander about it. He listened and nodded. He said truth leaks when pressure drops. He said let it leak. He said people can handle a leader who admits limits more than one who pretends to have none. Then he surprised me again. He asked me to invite a skeptic, someone who had always distrusted the other man methods. He wanted that voice in the room. The meeting was tense and short. The skeptic spoke about recklessness and embarrassment. The commander listened and did not interrupt. When the skeptic finished, the commander said recklessness without purpose is chaos. He said purpose without speed is paralysis. He said we needed both and had lost one. He did not defend past decisions. He described trade-offs. The skeptic left quieter than he arrived. At the hospital, the room felt smaller than memory. Equipment hummed with indifference. The commander stood by the bed and rested his hand on the rail. He did not speak for a long time. I looked away and watched light crawl across tile. When he finally spoke, it was not a speech. He said, "You scared the right people." He said, "You made the wrong ones honest." He said, "We argued because we needed different things from the same war." Then he stopped. The air held. Outside, he asked me to walk. We passed nurses and orderlies who nodded without curiosity. He said there are leaders who solve problems by removing friction and leaders who solve problems by creating pressure. He said both have costs. He said losing the second means the first must work harder. He said he was tired. Another twist arrived from across the water. A cable described rising tension with a former ally border's stiffening words sharpening. The commander read it and closed his eyes. He said, "Timing is cruel." He said the world is entering a phase where threats matter, even when no shots are fired. He said the other man would have been useful without moving an inch. That sentence landed heavy. Preparations continued. A band practiced quietly. A chaplain rehearsed words that would not comfort anyone and would be said anyway. The commander reviewed seating and corrected nothing. He seemed detached until a staffer mentioned the weather. Rain was expected. The commander nodded and said, "Rain keeps people honest." I did not understand until later. The night before the service, he asked me to bring the sealed folder again. He opened it and read a page and then another. He stopped at a line about instinct and shook his head. He said I should have told him. He did not say what. He did not need to. He closed the folder and handed it back to me. He said, "Not yet." At dawn, the rain came steady and thin. The cemetery filled with umbrellas and dark coats. The commander stood with his hands clasped behind his back posture, perfect face composed. He did not look at the cameras. He watched the ground. When the flag was folded, his knuckles whitened and then relaxed. I saw it and pretended not to. As the service ended, a senior officer leaned in and said something I could not hear. The commander nodded once. As we walked away, he said quietly that he had known the man for decades and had never told him the most important thing. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The rain covered the rest. Afterward, the reactions came fast. Articles framed rivalry into myth. Commentators argued about temperament and genius. The commander ignored all of it. He returned to work that afternoon and signed papers with deliberate care. He corrected a routing error and asked about fuel. Life pressed on, and that pressure was itself a message. That evening, he called me in and asked what people were saying now. I told him they were saying he was stronger for being restrained. He nodded and said, "Restraint is easy when the choice is obvious." He said, "The harder test is when restraint hides regret." He asked me to schedule a small dinner with the inner circle. No speeches, no notes. At the dinner, he spoke plainly. He said, "I want you to understand something before rumors teach it wrong." He said, "I envied his certainty and relied on it more than I admitted." He said, "I also saved him from himself more times than he would ever accept." He said that was the bargain. He said we kept each other honest by friction. Then he stopped. No one interrupted. As we left, he pulled me aside. He said tomorrow the world will move on. He said I will too. He said the lesson will stay if we keep it. He said sometimes the people who challenge us are the ones we cannot afford to lose. He asked me to remember that. I said I would. If you think this chapter changes how you see leadership, say so in the comments. Like the video if the weight is building. In the next chapter, I will tell you about the future fear that surfaced and the decision he made that revealed how deep the loss truly went. The fear arrived quietly, and it wore a future face. It came in cables that sounded cautious and meetings that ended too early. The commander read reports about borders hardening and allies watching each other with new eyes. He said nothing at first. He let the information settle like dust. Then one evening, he pointed at a map and said, "The war we just finished taught us the wrong lesson if we think peace means rest." I was with him when he framed it for the inner circle. He said the next contest would be about presence and credibility. He said shots might never be fired, and that would make everything harder. He said deterrence requires a belief on the other side that you are willing and able. He paused and added that belief used to have a name and a face. The room understood without anyone saying it. He asked for options, and the options sounded thin. More planning, more coordination, more statements. He listened and nodded, and then shook his head. He said plans do not scare anyone by themselves. He said statements wear out. He said what scared people was decisiveness embodied. He said we lost that embodiment and we would need to manufacture its effect without pretending we could replace the man. The twist came when he proposed a move that felt counterintuitive. He suggested slowing down in one area to speed up in another. He suggested public restraint paired with private readiness. He suggested exercises designed to be noticed without being advertised. He suggested putting competent officers forward who would never seek attention and letting rumors do the rest. The idea sounded almost theatrical until he explained the math. He said credibility grows when actions and silence align. Some objected. They said the public wanted reassurance. They said allies wanted clarity. He agreed and said reassurance does not require noise. He said clarity is delivered by consistency. He said consistency is easier when you stop chasing applause. I watched heads nod reluctantly. He was asking them to change habits learned over years. He tasked me with assembling examples where presence alone had shifted outcomes. I brought cases from the recent war and older ones from forgotten campaigns. He read them quickly and set them aside. He said, "These are reminders, not templates." He said, "The danger now is copying ghosts instead of building shadows." I asked what he meant. He said, "Shadows move with you and scare people without announcing themselves." The next days were a blur of quiet adjustments. Orders were refined, exercises scheduled without fanfare, briefings tightened. The commander insisted that every action have a purpose that could be explained in one sentence. If it took longer, he cut it. He said the world would be watching for confusion, and we would give them none. A countermove appeared from an unexpected corner. A commentator published a piece, suggesting American leadership had lost its edge with the passing of a certain general. It was not hostile, but it was sharp. It framed restraint as weakness. The commander read it and smiled briefly. He said, "This is useful." He said, "When critics misunderstand your strategy, you are harder to counter." He instructed the staff to make no response. Privately, he wrestled. I saw it in the way he paused before signing and the way he stared at the window after meetings. He confided that he feared mistaking caution for wisdom. He said the other man would have laughed at half measures. He said that laugh would have been cruel and motivating. He said he missed it. Another twist followed, and it was smaller but more dangerous. A senior officer proposed a bold demonstration meant to send a message. It carried risk and promised headlines. The commander listened and asked one question. He asked whether the demonstration would still be wise if no one noticed. The officer hesitated. The answer was no. The commander declined the proposal. He said, "We are not here to feed the mirror." At a dinner that week, he spoke to a younger commander who had never served under the man we had lost. The younger man asked what made him different. The commander said he moved faster than fear and slower than ego. He said that balance is rare. He said you cannot teach it, but you can design systems that reward pieces of it. He said, "Start there." The world pressed closer. Diplomatic language sharpened. Rumors grew legs. The commander stayed steady. He delegated with trust and demanded follow-through. He refused to be drawn into public debates. He told me the hardest part was resisting the urge to explain. He said, "Explanations invite arguments, and arguments waste time." One night, he asked me to open the sealed folder again. He read a passage about envy and closed his eyes. He said, "I am afraid of the wrong thing." He said, "I am afraid of failing to deter when I should be failing to provoke." He said, "The line is thin, and the penalty is high." He handed the folder back and said, "Not yet." The shift began to work. Reports came in of tensions, easing at the margins, not because of speeches, but because of quiet readiness. The commander acknowledged it with a nod and moved on. He refused to celebrate. He said celebration creates expectation, and expectation creates pressure to repeat. He said this is maintenance, not victory. Then came the moment that tested everything. A flare-up threatened to spill over. Phones rang. Advisors urged statements. The commander waited. He ordered a single action that was precise and reversible. It signaled capacity without escalation. The flare-up cooled. The room exhaled. Afterward, he said, "This is what we lost him for." He said the instinct would have been the same, but the execution different. He said we did not need to be him to honor him. He said we needed to learn the lesson and keep our hands steady. I believed him, and also knew the cost was still climbing. As the week ended, he asked me a final question for the night. He asked whether I thought the country would understand restraint if it never knew what was avoided. I said probably not. He nodded and said that is the price. He said leadership is often paying it quietly. If you think restraint can be an act of strength, say so in the comments. Like the video if the tension feels sharper now. In the next chapter, I will tell you about the moment when restraint almost failed and the decision that forced him to confront the regret he had been avoiding. Pressure finally broke its disguise and showed teeth not in public speeches, but in paper and timing. It began with a routine notice that arrived at dawn and pretended to be harmless. I read it twice and felt the edge underneath. The notice redefined coordination in language that sounded careful and neutral, yet it bent authority sideways, not enough to scream, enough to drift. The commander saw it the same way and did not react. He asked for coffee and a clean desk and said, "Let it work for a day." That choice frightened everyone who understood systems. Drift is how control changes hands without fingerprints. I followed the flow and watched small things slide. Requests paused, briefings overlapped, officers waited for answers that arrived late. Nothing collapsed, which made it more dangerous. The notice was testing tolerance, measuring how much friction could be added before anyone objected. By noon, I had a stack of examples, times and routes and names. The commander asked me to hold them. He wanted the pattern to speak. He said paper tells the truth when it is used. In the afternoon, a call came from a civilian office asking for clarification. The notice had reached beyond the uniform. That was the outside twist, unexpected and sharp. The commander smiled once and told me to prepare a packet. We sent facts, not arguments. Timelines, authorities' impacts, measured in hours and miles. We framed it as safety. Safety moves faster than pride. The reply came before dusk. The notice was suspended pending review. Suspended was enough. The sideways flow stopped and the room breathed again. The counterstrike arrived immediately, and it did not come from paper. It came from rumor. A voice began whispering that restraint meant weakness, that caution meant loss of edge. The whispers moved through mess halls and offices and reached the press by evening. It was clever because rumor demands response, and response creates oxygen. The commander refused to feed it. Instead, he moved people. He replaced a liaison who had been repeating the whispers and did it quietly. He paired trusted officers with units that felt uncertain and sent them without cameras. He visited a hospital and fixed a transport delay in an hour. The whispers thinned. Competence starves rumor. That night, he asked me to open the sealed folder again. He read a line about envy and folded the page back on itself. He said, "This is where regret tries to help and usually fails." He said, "I should have said something then." He did not say what. He closed the folder and handed it back. He said, "Not yet." The next day brought a proposal dressed as generosity. A senior advisor suggested a bold demonstration meant to reassure allies and silence critics. It promised headlines and carried risk. The commander asked one question: would it still be wise if no one noticed? The advisor hesitated. The answer told us everything. The proposal died without drama. The press grew louder. Commentators framed restraint as absence. The commander read one column and laughed quietly. He said, "When critics misunderstand you, you are harder to counter." He ordered no response. He ordered consistency. He ordered readiness that did not pose. In private, he wavered. I saw it when he paused before signing and stared at the window after meetings. He told me he feared mistaking patience for wisdom. He said the man we lost would have known when to push. He said the difference between now and then was not courage but context. He said context is the hardest teacher. The moment that nearly unraveled everything arrived late on a gray afternoon. A flare-up on a border threatened to spill. Advisors urged statements. Phones rang. The commander waited. He ordered a single action that was precise and reversible. It signaled capacity without escalation. The flare cooled. The room exhaled. Afterward, he said, "This is the line." He said the instinct would have been the same, the execution different. He said we honor the lesson without chasing the ghost. He said we do not need to be him to use what he taught us. I believed him and also knew the cost was not finished rising. That evening, the outside world pressed closer. A broadcaster aired a segment suggesting American leadership had lost its most dangerous edge. The commander watched without comment. He asked me to mark the time. He said narratives peak when you ignore them. He said tomorrow will be worse and then better. Tomorrow was worse. A cable arrived, hinting at coordinated pressure from several fronts. It was careful and plausible, and designed to test response time. The commander read it and said, "We will not blink." He assigned tasks in a sentence each. He demanded follow-through and refused commentary. The system moved. By nightfall, the pressure eased. Not because of words, because of posture. The commander nodded and moved on. He refused celebration. He said, "Maintenance is not victory." He said, "Victory makes promises you cannot keep." He called me in late and asked a question without waiting for an answer. He asked whether the country would ever know what had been avoided. I said probably not. He nodded and said that is the price. He said leadership often pays it quietly. As I left, he stopped me and said, "Tomorrow we speak plainly to the inner circle." He said there is one thing I have been avoiding, and it is time. He said bring the folder and close the door. If you feel the pressure tightening, say so in the comments. Like the video, if restraint feels heavier than action. In the next chapter, I will tell you about the moment he finally said what he had been holding back, and why that admission changed everything just before it was too late. He asked me to close the door, and the sound of it settling felt final like a latch, finding its place. The folder lay between us thin and heavier than it looked. He did not sit at first. He paced once, stopped, then placed his hand flat on the table as if steadying it. When he spoke, it was not for effect. It was for accuracy. He said, "I have been avoiding a truth because I believed delay would protect people." He said, "Delay protected no one. It only protected my comfort." He opened the folder and turned pages slowly, not reading as much as recognizing. Dates, fragments, admissions written when the war was loud enough to hide them. He said, "The thing that frightens me is not that I failed to say something to him. it is that I failed to say it to myself. He said, I used restraint to manage him, and then I used restraint to manage my regret. He said the second use was dishonest. The inner circle arrived and took their seats without instruction. They sensed weight. He did not waste it. He told them plainly that the country had lost a capacity that could not be replaced by committees or schedules. He said, we would compensate with systems and discipline, but compensation is not replacement. He said, admitting that weakness was not surrender. He said it was alignment. A senior officer pushed back gently and said the nation needed confidence. He nodded and said confidence is not denial. He said confidence is knowing what you lack and planning anyway. He said the man we lost provided fear to adversaries by being unpredictable within a clear purpose. He said we would provide predictability with an edge, not an edge without rules. The room held. The twist came when he turned the lens inward and did not look away. He said, I need you to hear this from me before rumors teach it wrong. He said, I envied his certainty and depended on it more than I admitted. He said, when I argued with him, it was often because he exposed my caution. He said, when I restrained him, it was often because I feared what he would reveal about me. Silence followed, not shocked sober. He did not stop there. He said I also protected him more than he knew, and that protection cost me credibility with people who mattered. He said that was the bargain we struck without signing it. He said partnerships like that work until time runs out. He said time ran out. Outside the building, the city breathed, and the war felt distant. Inside the room, the war arrived again, as memory and future. He laid out a plan that was less dramatic than any speech. It focused on posture and cadence and discipline. He assigned responsibilities in sentences short enough to memorize. He refused commentary. He demanded follow-through. Then came the moment that broke the tension and remade it. A cable arrived, mid-meeting marked urgent, describing coordinated pressure designed to test response thresholds. Advisors looked to him. He read the cable once and did not look up. He ordered a sequence of actions precise and reversible designed to signal capacity without escalation. He ordered silence to accompany motion. He ordered consistency across commands. 95% of the tension broke in the next minute, not because of noise, because of clarity. Phones rang and stopped. Units moved and held. The pressure eased. The room exhaled together. He did not smile. He said, this is the standard. He said we will do this again without applause. After the meeting, he stayed behind with me. He sat then finally and looked tired in a way I had not seen. He said, now you understand why the loss matters beyond sentiment. He said deterrence is a language, and we lost a dialect. He said we will speak the language anyway, carefully with fewer words. He asked me to read back a line from the folder, and I chose one about instinct and speed. He listened and nodded. He said if I had told him what he meant, would anything have changed? He answered himself before I could. He said it might have softened the end. He said softness is not weakness when it is honest. That night, the press tried to provoke reaction. Commentators framed the actions as cautious. He ordered no response. He ordered the work. By morning, the story had moved on board by the absence of spectacle. The actions remained. At dawn, he walked with me past the maps and stopped. He traced a route with his finger and said this is where speed mattered. He said we will find other ways to be fast. He said we will not chase ghosts. He said honoring a lesson does not require imitating a man. Before leaving, he handed me the folder and told me to seal it again. He said, not forever. He said, when the time is right, it will help someone else tell the truth sooner. He said, put it somewhere safe. As I locked it away, he added one more instruction. He said, write this down for yourself. He said, leadership is choosing which regrets you can live with. He said, today I chose to live with honesty. If this chapter tightened the knot, say so in the comments, and like the video to keep the story moving. In the next chapter, I will tell you how the world reacted when the noise faded, and what remained after restraint did its work. The world did what it always does when the noise fades. It moved on without waiting for permission. Headlines found newer sparks and arguments chased fresher echoes. Inside the building, the work stayed the same, and that sameness felt earned. Orders were short and clean. Meetings ended on time. People slept a little longer and spoke a little less. The commander watched it all, with the patience of someone who had paid for quiet. I noticed how his days changed. He walked the halls without escorts and stopped to ask clerks about problems no one thought to elevate. He fixed a routing error with a pencil and erased it with the same care. He thanked people once and never again, which told them the standard had been set. Authority returned to habit, and habit did the rest. There were moments when the absence pressed in. A cable would arrive that asked for judgment faster than comfort allowed. The commander would pause and then choose clarity over speed or speed over explanation. Each time he did it without drama. Each time I thought of the man whose presence had once answered those questions before they finished forming. The commander thought of him too. I could tell by the way his eyes softened and then hardened again. The inner circle adjusted. Some missed the electricity. Some missed the relief of someone else carrying the edge. The commander addressed it once and never again. He said, if you crave electricity, you will burn your hands. He said, if you crave relief, you will drift. He said, discipline is the bridge, and we will cross it every day. No one argued. Outside allies watched and recalibrated. The posture held. Quiet readiness spoke louder than statements. A few tensions eased. Others hardened and then softened again. The commander accepted neither credit nor blame. He said, maintenance is invisible by design. He said, if you can see it, you are probably doing it wrong. Weeks passed, and the sealed folder stayed sealed. I checked the lock each morning out of habit, and because habits matter. The commander did not ask for it again. He did not need to. The truth had done its work inside him, and that was enough. When leaders integrate a lesson, they stop repeating it. There was one afternoon when a younger officer asked him directly about the man we had lost. Not a challenge, a hunger. The commander answered without telling stories. He said he moved faster than fear and slower than ego. He said that balance is rare and expensive. He said systems can encourage pieces of it, but people make it real. The officer nodded and left with something he would carry longer than a quote. At dusk, we walked past the map room and the commander stopped. He traced a route he had traced before and said, this is where certainty mattered. He said we will build certainty differently now. He said the goal is the same. He said the method will cost us sleep but save us time. He smiled slightly and moved on. The press tried one last time to draw him out. A question framed restraint as retreat. He did not answer. He sent a unit to train quietly and scheduled a briefing that said nothing and meant everything. The story lost interest. The work remained. That contrast became the pattern. I realized then that the final verdict had arrived without ceremony. Silence had judged the argument and found it wanting. The commander had paid the price and refused the refund. He had chosen which regret he could live with and built a day around it. The country would never know the margin that had been preserved. The margin would know. On my last night before reassignment, I stood alone in the office and listened to the building breathe. The radiator ticked. Paper shifted. I opened the drawer and touched the folder once and left it closed. Some truths need air. Others need time. This one had earned both. As I turned off the lamp, I remembered the moment after the call when he said gone and meant more than death. He had lost a dialect and kept the language. He had lost a rival and kept a standard. He had lost time and learned its cost. Leadership does not refund what it teaches. If this ending sits heavier than the beginning, say so in the comments and like the video to keep the quiet stories alive. Next time, I will tell you how a lesson carried forward changes a decision when no one is watching and why that is where it matters most.